Hey everyone, welcome back to Crypto Cash. Thank you so much for joining me here. Hope you're having a phenomenal day and a wonderful weekend. Once again, thank you again also for your vote of confidence. We got a lot of new subscribers, new members over in our Discord as well, so it's been a lot of fun. Thanks again and welcome aboard. We're going to be looking at the altcoin season index, kind of discussing how we don't want to be super naive that this is just going to keep going straight up, but also we're on the right side of tracks now for the most part. So I think further continuation higher is more likely. I just expect some kind of a correction here this weekend, specifically to fill some of these CME gaps that are currently forming, and then also some indications here in the lower time frames kind of letting us know that we are potentially going to be diverging for a short while. However, all that being said, we got a significant imbalance here with 4-to-1 ratio, 4.5-to-1 ratio with Ethereum longs versus shorts getting liquidated, and a 14-to-1 ratio for Bitcoin. So I think we are due to see a slight correction here. We had a solid green week. It makes sense to see somewhat of a continuation lower here to key level supports, which we're going to identify today. Be sure to stick around. Let's take a closer look. All right, folks, before we jump into the backend data and double check a few important factors, I want to start with some positive here. Thanks again for the wonderful feedback. I'm glad it's working out well for you. In the last week's worth of trading, we've been seeing some good profits here for Ethereum, good 54%. We had to be patient on that one. Litecoin, 43%, 42% for XRP, and 62% for SUI. So those are all long positions on coins that we cover in these videos here consistently. So congrats again on that. Quick heads up too, we do have a pretty awesome promotional bonus here with Bitunix. Be sure to take advantage. We got over 1,000 traders who have used my link to register, and if so, you're automatically eligible for this, and there's a pretty significant amount of rewards here available for you, so be sure to check that out. You can track your rewards and everything on the link down below, so be sure to reach out if you have any questions on that, but I just want to make sure you take full advantage of that if you can. That's available until October 10th, if I'm not mistaken. All right, so back-end data, we want to double check some stuff here. First things first, let's just go ahead and discuss these liquidations here, because when we look at the difference here, and the reason why liquidation is super important is helps us identify if something's lopsided or perhaps just the overall trend, right? So if we take the opposite of what we're seeing here, in other words, we see very little longs liquidated and a lot of shorts liquidated. It does imply a lot of positions were out of place here with some liquidation events in the 115, 116K range for Bitcoin. But the key takeaway here is there was 50 million in short liquidation data versus 3.5 million for longs. So that really tells us that while yes, longs are in play and it's a better consideration, you may want to consider securing profits because we might see that shift in momentum considering there's very little shorts left to liquidate for the market makers and the price to pull back. Granted, this is a weekend, so I'm assuming we're just going to be seeing some profit taking this weekend, and that allows the price to pull back too, and in turn, liquidate late longs. All right, so try not to be a long leading into a very solid week on a Saturday here. It's just a bad idea. Wait for the price to pull back either later tonight or sometime tomorrow morning. That's when you want to consider longing. Between now and then, it's probably just some short scalps between now and then. That's kind of the consideration. All that said, we got 4-to-1 ratio here for Ethereum, and then Solana has roughly about a 4-to-1 as well. So we can see liquidation occurring more to the upside than downside, essentially telling us that that number should start to slow down. What that also tells us too, a simple translation, is that we're at a tentative top. All right, so we're going to talk about that. Now, before we go any further here, I want to just discuss quickly here the 3-hour time frame and just kind of recognize that we're pretty good shape here. We're actually creeping above the 20-day SMA here as well on the 3-day. So it's usually a very positive sign. Now, I feel like we're going to see a bit of a capitulation here just based on the simple fact that we have some CME gaps here forming. Now, when we talk about CME gaps, these are very tentative. This just started yesterday, as a matter of fact. And what this basically tells us is that CME futures closed on Friday. It reopens back up on Sunday. There's roughly down for approximately 2 trading days. And in that regard, it creates a gap, and these gaps are oftentimes filled at some point or another. You see this previous gap here from Bitcoin. It took 3 weeks to fill. All right, but we finally hit that 117K range, and now the price is starting to pull back. Okay, so it's a pretty consistent thing. If we see this here, previously we had a CME gap here, price goes up. CME gap got filled here, where price is going down. So that kind of just lets us know that we're more likely to continue a bit lower there, just based on trends. Right, trends are not always consistent, but they are fairly beneficial to understand because they are your friend. You've heard the term, the trend is your friend. There's a reason that term exists. All that said, CME gap forming from 4,700 to the current price point for Ethereum and 242 for Solana. So what I'm hoping for is for these gaps to be pretty nice and large come Sunday, Sunday afternoon or Monday morning. And then when we have our Fed meeting here later in the week, potentially, inflation data comes in positive, when we can see that pump back to fill those gaps. Okay. So I'm optimistic about taking some longs at some key level supports, but between now and then, we haven't hit those levels yet, such as 113,000 for Bitcoin and 4440 for Ethereum. We're going to discuss that here in a minute, of course, but the concept remains the same here. We're still in very good shape. We're in a neutral standpoint for the Fear and Greed Index, which is basically just a good iteration of kind of what's going on here, or interpretation rather, of where the mindset is at. Generally, when you see neutral Fear and Greed Index, it implies that there's a transition occurring. Okay, so we're shifting from that bearish to bullish type of situation. Now you got to recognize buying the greed isn't always the best idea. So if we continue to progress higher, we're going to want to consider selling. Right, that's the concept there. Either way, it's a very generic summarization of how that works, but that's the general concept here. As we're starting to see the greed increase, we're going to start seeing some slowing pressure, especially into these key level resistances for Bitcoin, 117 to 118K. We covered that yesterday. Looking here at the altcoin season index is a pretty significant margin, 1.75 trillion now in altcoins alone. So that's a pretty big margin, and that basically tells us that alt season is on the horizon, or essentially a realistic probability here. Excuse me. The reason why that's relevant, though, is the simple fact that we have a lot of money flowing into altcoins increases sustainability. Okay. Now, money is going to be flowing away from this. I would venture to guess here soon, with profits being taken, but it just shows an overall strength here in altcoins that you want to be careful and cautious and respect the fact that just shorting your shirt off right now is maybe not a good idea. All right. So those are kind of some foundational things that we understand. So now that we know that, let's look at Bitcoin and kind of see what's going on here in the back end. As per usual, on the weekends, we do see the average top traders, basically large position traders with high margin, they're starting to taper off with their longs. They're increasing their short positions. So makes perfect sense. We also see volume starting to dissipate. This is common for a weekend, but it's also more common when we start to see those local tops, which we've already identified is at 116 to 118K range for Bitcoin. Looking here at the volume delta, this is pretty consistent for a weekend. We see more retail traders trading over the weekends, which is just kind of letting us know that the likelihood of the price going down is higher too, because market makers and institutional traders are pulling the price back. Okay. All that being said, no matter how you look at it, the most important stuff here, I feel, is open interest and liquidation. So let's talk about that. And just so you know, I have the monthly over on the right-hand side here for Bitcoin. So over the last 1 month's worth of trading, 111, 113, and now 114 and some change, just say 114 even, are the three key level supports for us. So if you're going to be considering a short position, remember to secure profits in the 114 to 113K range. If you get lucky, we might see 111. Okay, that's kind of what that tells us there. All right, so a good amount of support. All that said, liquidation long deltas still maintaining itself at 15 billion. That's kind of normal and average. When we look here, this last 3 days on the left-hand side, I like to look at this because this kind of tells us what may happen over the weekend, with it being just a weekend trading. We can see that 113 is at heaviest concentration below and approximately 118 above. So there's liquidation in both directions. It just depends on kind of how you look at it. But we do have a 64% open interest delta, which is generally favorable. Anything over 50 is a good sign. And then, of course, we have 10% for true retail longs. We want to have this lower versus that of open interest. Usually that combination implies sustainability. But I'm more so leaning towards the price action pulling back, just based on the simple fact that we have some overextensions. Those CME gaps are starting to fill, or have gotten filled rather, the recent ones. And that's just kind of the consensus here. It's a profit-taking weekend. That's my guess. But I don't think it's going to be a precipitous pullback. A lot of times on weekends, you'll see just altcoins flailing about. Right now, they seem to be sustaining and doing well. I mean, obviously, you saw the profits that we took here on some of these coins. These are some like last-minute little pumps here that are causing the price actions to trigger some nice take profit targets. So all good stuff there in the overall sense, but let's look at the daily time frame and recognize we do have a small fair value gap as low as 114.4. That's pretty close to our area of open interest. It's also that local high range. If you recall correctly, 113,000 on smaller time frames was retested multiple times, a cup and handle pattern that broke out effectively. That's where we're seeing that support, 113 to 114. So this guy right there is a good solid support range. But everything here on the daily time frame looks pretty nice. We do have an early divergence potential, of course, stochastic RSI, but that's more of it's not really really a firm indication we're going to be turning around. It just kind of lets us know we're tentatively topped out, which we've talked about for a while, knowing that this range here, the local high, once more, 116 to 117K is an area of confluence, right? We've got some fib levels there too and some previous moving averages. A lot of reasons why the 117 to 118K range will be heavily guarded initially, at least for a short while here. All that said, daily time frame doesn't have any significant divergences. We're now over all moving averages, which is super important. So it reinforces support at 114 and some change, okay? The 4-hour candle rather. We want to kind of look here at the 4-hour time frame and just recognize we're over all moving averages. There's not a lot here, minus a couple of fair value gaps that are mostly filled already. So truth be told, 113 may be a bit of a liberal consideration for a take profit target if you're considering a short. So to me personally, at this point, it seems too high a risk to consider a short on Bitcoin unless you're using large leverage or low position size. I would just be careful if you're considering that. But the concept is that 114 to 113K, that's where I'm leaning more towards taking a long position. Why don't you comment below, let me know, what are you thinking on Bitcoin? Are you planning to take a long or a short right now? Or is it one of these bad situations you're just gonna avoid altogether? More of a chopped salad, right? And that's kind of how some weekends are. All right, let's go and take a look at the next series of altcoins. Quick heads up to my traders, make sure you take full advantage of this offer here from Bitunix. There's a significant deposit reward bonus as well as a $16,000 individual reward for just trading on the exchange. If you use my link to register in the past, you're automatically eligible. If you use my link to register now, you're eligible for all future trading bonuses and competitions. Check out the links down below for more information. All right, folks, let's go and take a quick look here at Chainlink first, kind of see what's going on with this altcoin. And just quickly to recognize, when we look at the backend data, open interest is super helpful. So usually I like to look at the smaller timeframes of the 7-day look back here, essentially letting us know more specifically local areas of open interest. These are areas that are commonly retested as a new low, which we can see our previous high roughly at about 23.70. Round number, $24 is that area of open interest here. So if the price continues to pull back, that would be a likely pivot point for us, a good consideration for long just from a bird's eye view. Now, obviously, we want to look at the charts first to recognize that, but that's usually a positive sign. When we look here, we got 500 million liquidation long delta. That's extremely strong here for this coin, kind of letting us know that further upside would make a lot more sense. And if we look at the last 7 days, there's not a ton of liquidation on the downside. So as we looked at some of those heat maps earlier today for liquidation, we want to recognize that, hey, there's a lot more people getting liquidated taking shorts than long positions. And there's a reason why, because we're in a position right now where there's not a lot of liquidation here locally. So the price has to literally come down to like $22 range to see that liquidation, therefore emphasizing support in the current range. Okay, now it seems kind of crazy and weird to think about it like that, but it's very logical in the sense that, market makers are going to look for those manipulative patterns. And right now there's not enough longs to liquidate. So why push the price action down? They're just going to let the price continue to pump higher. Now, at this point though, while I do feel like we are going to probably go up in the overall sentiment here, I'm still very bullish in the overall. I also feel that with what we see here so far, a short-term correction would also make perfect sense. So let's take a look and see if there's any key levels here to identify outside of those open interest ranges we already looked at. And we look here, we see a nice normal rejection here at the 0.618 fib level. That's kind of a common area of retracement where the price will usually start to capitulate. We can see a local high here too with a previous day closure at $25. I'm going to round down to say 25 even. So 25 is that tentative resistance for us. Until we close above that level, we can presume that'll be the new resistance, but we're also converging above the MACD and well over 50 in the RSI with money flow index above the price, or above the RSI rather. Those are all very good signs. Okay, so the bullish continuation potential for this coin is higher. While we can expect somewhat of a pullback, I think it'd be naive to think we're going to get a super significant correction for Chainlink. Okay, so overall we're looking pretty good. What we normally see in situations like this is some type of handle pattern, which is commonly referred to as a cup and handle, where the price will start to flag out before it takes off again. So my money here is on a local high, a retest, this local high here, about $24 for the price action to continue further up. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and set an alert in that range just to kind of give me, some perspective on where we're at there. So we'll just do 2405, see kind of if we get that triggered, if it's worth taking a long or a short. Okay, now I don't recommend shorts at this point. It's just kind of one of those things where it's ideal to recognize that the overall sentiment is still very bullish, right? We've broken our descending trend lines on the macro. Bitcoin has a lot of confirming factors. So Chainlink should continue to progress higher because of that, right? But a short-term correction to the local fair value gaps and this 0.382 fib level also makes a lot of sense. And that would be a perfect pivot point considering there's a lot of open interest support at 24. All right. So those are my thoughts on Chainlink. What are yours? Why don't you comment below? Really love to hear your thoughts. Let's go ahead and double check here Litecoin next, kind of see where we're at, and go from there. So first of all, with Litecoin, let's quickly look at the last 7 days of open interest and kind of see if there's any potential supports in the ranges here. Because once more, when we see these pullbacks on weekends after a strong green weekday, it's important to recognize key levels that may or may not hold. All right. So in this case here, 117.50. Up down as low as 116. That's the support range for us based on open interest. So it basically implies there's a lot of potential support there with the price pulling back if it were to. Now we look at liquidation long delta, 300 million. That's good. Generally implies sustainability in the current price point. We look at the amount of liquidation here. This is the last 7 days of look back. We can see there is a pretty big chunk between 110 and 112. So if we lose our open interest support at 116, 112 would probably be the next target area there. Once again, market makers love pushing the price action in those directions to destroy those people, whoever's in that position. If you saw here, there's a significant correction for Litecoin before it turned back around like as if nothing ever happened, when truth is the rest of the market was doing just fine at that time. All right, those are liquidation hunts. They're very common and consistent in trading. Take a look here at the daily time frame. We want to double check this here. I've got our local range here for our fib levels. We've surpassed that 0.618 fib level. So that does reinforce that our support at 118 is a potential area of confluence there. In other words, we've got some moving averages there. We got our local high there. We got all moving averages below the price. We're above 50 in the RSI. However, money flow index is trailing behind. So it's kind of a lagging indicator, of course. It's going to be looking the last 14 days worth of trading. And this coin's been moderately bearish in the last 14 candles. So the overall sentiment here basically implies that we don't have super strength on the macro, but it is letting us know that we have good sustainability with good momentum. The 4-hour time frame also reflects something similar here. We're going to see this consistency in a lot of trading coins right now, or coins that we're looking at trading. Right there, we can see a lot of confluence in the 115 to 116 range. So if we do end up pulling back, 115 to 116 seems like a solid consideration for a long with that added amount of confirming factors with moving averages, right? They're not just magical fib levels. They're not just these ridiculous Elliott waves, theories. Keep in mind, theories are theories until they're proven. And the whole concept here is that we just got a lot of confirming stuff in that range, right? So emphasize the support below the price, therefore reinforcing that you shouldn't short this coin. That's a simple way to understand it. And it's probably going to be the narrative here today for the most part, outside of maybe an outlier or two, just letting us know that, hey, you know, these are risky conditions. Even though this coin doesn't have full-on confirming factors, I think you know, if you consider shorting, you may want to watch it close and be careful, because a lot of coins like Litecoin are doing pretty well versus the rest of the market. And we already looked at altcoin season index, 1.7+ trillion in liquid in crypto market cap for altcoins. That's huge, right? So a lot of sustainability. So people seem to think we're going to pull back super hard. I don't personally feel that way. I think we're going to see a slight correction this weekend, along with a continuation higher. Pending we don't have a crazy weird Fed meeting later in the week, we should be in good shape to see a continuation. All right, last but not least, we do want to recognize there's a key level resistance at 121. I'm rounding up a little bit there, but that's a fib level as well as a previous high. I've had this on my chart for a while, so just know that we are, once again, potential consideration for a cup and handle pattern here where the price is going to flag out. We get in at that lower range. So right now, in situations like this, when I see these early cup and handle patterns, I'm being patient. I'm setting alerts in these areas of confluence where we want to see the price pull back to. Is every single one of these coins we're going to look at here today pull back to those levels? Probably not, no. But if I consider 5 different entries and a couple of them trigger, I reevaluate later and see if it's worthwhile. That's the concept there, folks. Always reevaluate. Don't just take trades in the blind. Now let's take a look here at ICP next. This is a highly requested coin. I could totally understand why. We've got a pretty big ICP community. All that said, $5 to $4.70 is that heavy amount of open interest. So that local bottom here in the last month, we have a ton of open interest. Now, I've already looked at this last 7 days for this coin. It's roughly the same. So there's no reason to kind of reference that. You had to take my word for it, but good amount of support just below the price as low as 470. We can see liquidation long delta is still high, which isn't super high for this coin, but it's still high nonetheless. And we want to recognize here too that there's a lot of liquidation at 480 down as low as 440. So open interest and liquidation at the same place. What does that mean for us? Well, it implies that we're probably going to see a candle wick down to sweep those liquidation levels, because that's just how market makers work, but the price will probably pump immediately after. So it's that typical power of three manipulative trade setup that you typically see in most cases. So would not be surprised if we see that. All that said, look at the daily time frame. We do have a larger type of macro structure here, where we have a break of our descending trend line, as well as basically that descending descending wedge pattern, essentially just letting us know that the falling wedge broke out to the upside, and that we're now establishing higher highs and higher lows. Okay, so 490 emphasizes support. So an average position between 470 and 490 seems like a practical consideration at this point. Now, when we look at the macro, we want to double check, we are peaking above 50 in the RSI, and the money flow index is above the price. Those are usually very favorable signs. So I think the macro structure here for ICP is looking pretty decent. Granted, it may be considered a higher risk trade if you're going to consider a long just yet. So waiting for that 470, maybe 490 range to be retested might be a better consideration. But the thing is, the way the market is right now, you may not even see that level hit. All right, it's just kind of one of those things where you kind of got to stack up a lot of different considerations for entry, and the ones that trigger are the ones that are you're there for presently. Those are the ones you want to trade. Once again, don't just go to bed at night and have a limit order for a 50x leverage cross trade. That's like the worst thing you could ever do for yourself. I'm sure there's plenty of other traders doing that, and it's normal to do, unfortunately. And some people have some luck with it, but you don't want to put luck in your side. You want to put statistical, favorability in your corner. That's kind of where I like to trade. Speaking of which, let's double check a couple of important things here on the 4-hour for ICP, just to round this out. We are starting to see a divergence. We don't have money flow index above the RSI. That's usually an unfavorable sign, or less sustainability potential for that. We also see stochastic swinging down too. So I'm going to be gearing up for potential long in the 470 to 490 range, just because this local point of control, again, we got 485 for the volume, or 490. Depending on how far back you look, we got our open interest at that range. The only thing that's concerning is this chunk of liquidation at about 470. So if we see 490, we may even see a little bit more of a wick down. So that's why it's probably important to consider averaging into your position. Keep in mind, folks, this may not happen. All right, the price could go up from here, but taking a long at this exact level is slightly risky, but it's just as risky to try to short. So either way you look at it, I'll post a playout chart on our Twitter, Telegram, and Discord. Links down below for that if you're curious. And again, if you want to become a better trader, cryptocash.tech is a site linked down below. I have access to those trade signals. We've been doing very well here lately, but we're not trying to over leverage, and I haven't been taking a ton of shorts recently. And the main reason why is because the market is still mostly bullish, right? So please understand that. All right, what are your thoughts on ICP? Comment below. Love to hear your thoughts. Just before we take a look at the next altcoin, I want to recommend you consider trading with Bitunix. If you use my link to register down below, or have in the past, you'll always be eligible for future trading competitions, but this one is awesome. It's probably the best one I've seen yet, with a full-on $16,000 individual prize pool, as well as a collective prize pool as well for the top 30 traders. Be sure to check out the link down below for more information. Let's take a look here next at AVAX, kind of round this one out here and see where we're at, because AVAX is looking very strong. In fact, that $25 range was super strong support. We can see this here based on the last 1 month's worth of trading. 25 to 26 is a major support range for us. So let's take a look at the last 7 days. Let's see if there's anything kind of more telling on open interest, and let us know kind of where we're at. So $29 is that heavy concentration of open interest for AVAX now here locally. So that does reinforce support in that range. Obviously, you can see a lot of volume accumulated there too. So that, in combination with liquidation long delta remaining high and some liquidation down as low as 28, implies that 29 or 28 are the two local bottoms for us. Now, I say 28 because, once again, it's really common for market makers to be like, they go, everyone takes longs right here, and they go, whoopsie daisy, and then they rip every potential long out, and then they just take the price off. So it's unfortunate. It's very standard. With this being a fair value gap down as low as 27, we've got three potential areas of consideration. They're all easy round numbers. 27, 28, and 29 are three either take profit targets on a short, or more importantly, average entries for consideration on a long, okay? I like to lean more towards the price pulling back to those levels. I'd much rather recommend that you wait for an opportunity that never happens than to try to take a high risk trade to those ranges. So based on everything being mostly bullish, it makes very little sense to try to short to those levels. It makes more sense to wait for those ranges that may not happen. Okay, I hope that makes sense, because once more, I'm never going to try to recommend you just take some crazy, ridiculous trade. It's always, majority of what I do is being a patient trader looking for good opportunities, and sometimes they don't always happen. But at this point, we see a significant amount of resistance, previous resistance at $26, right? You can see that pretty clear. Multiple attempts to break that. This one attempt created a fair value gap, so it would make sense, once more, for the price to start trickling down to this $26 to $27 range, fill that fair value gap, and then turn around from there. Once more, there's a lot of liquidation incentivizing the price, right here at 28. So I think further downside makes more sense for AVAX, but just know if you're going to consider a short position, it is inherently riskier right now just based on the way the market is moving. Okay, so we'll keep an eye on that guy and see what's going on. Moving on to Ondo. This is a coin we took a chunk of profit on here recently because we got in at, I think between 90 and 95 cents. Now, that was albeit a higher risk trade at the time because there was a lot of resistance at $1. But now that $1 has been broken, we can presume that maybe retested as a new low. Let's double check and see if we have any open interest ranges there. This is the last 1 month's worth of trading on Ondo. We can see 104 and 95 cents, those two significant areas below the price. Now, we zoom in a little bit further, look at the last 7 days. We have the most amount of volume at roughly 104 and 102. So really kind of lets us know that the low $1 range is a good solid support range. So it'd be an excellent consideration for dollar cost averaging or potentially taking some low leverage longs there. We look at liquidation delta, it's still $250 million. That's pretty high for this coin. And we look at this here as well. Last 7 days of liquidation, there's a chunk just below $1. So I wouldn't put it past that $1 mark getting swept and then just quick little wick down to 97 cents and then right back up. So it's very standard stuff there, but at this point, there's liquidation at 115 and $1 even, just close approximates for you there. Easy round numbers to remember. Now, daily time frame, if we zoom in here to the last, ever since we've been in this range, we can see the most amount of volume of about 91 cents. That's pretty close to where we got into our long position. And we look here, we can see we got this a stochastic swinging way high. Money flow index is higher than the RSI and MACD converging. These are all very good signs that you generally don't want to trade against. What I mean by that is you don't want to try to short a coin that has this kind of momentum. Now, the truth is the price will likely continue to pull back. We're seeing major divergences in the 4-hour time frame. So lower time frames are letting us know that we're going to see a short-term correction. That's kind of the narrative here today, right? The whole concept of trading today, if you're going to, is to keep it tight and make sure you're not getting too aggressive or greedy on your short positions. All that said, there's a lot of fair value gaps down as low as 103 and or 96 cents. So well, I think it's less likely that we see this sub $1 range. If we do get closer to $1, a quick wick down would make perfect sense, so be very careful. But the concept here is that we are definitely in a type of divergence here in the short term, so a lower price point makes perfect sense, but if you're going to consider shorting, make sure you watch it close. Last but not least, this is a coin here that's been highly contested. It's Crow coin, of course. There's no liquidation date on this coin, unfortunately, on the back end, but I can tell you that this coin has been struggle busting, and it's one of those coins that is notoriously it's very good about going up really fast and is really bad about continuing going up after it does so. What I mean by that is if you look at its history, every time it pumps, it'll inevitably dump. Okay, so you're pretty much statistically favorable right now if you want to consider a short to get the price to keep going lower. Every time it goes down or it goes up, we see it go down, right? Now, how low is it going to go? It's hard to say specifically, but at this point, that's just kind of the narrative here, I would say. That's pretty safe to presume we're going to be pulling back more. Now, when we look at the lower time frames, let's first of all identify here on the daily, we got this local support at 25 cents. So if 25 cents does not hold today, there's a distinct probability we go lower. Okay, 4-hour time frame. Let's quickly note here as well. From a macro perspective, we've remained under 50 in the RSI. MACD is diverging. I forgot to look at the daily. We can see we're still over 50, but money flow index is super low. So there's money just flowing away from this coin. Volume's drying up. There's no reason to consider a long or to think that taking a long right now is ideal. This is just a bad coin to trade right now to the upside. While it has little pumps and little glimmers of hope, that's really all it is. This coin is trash in the overall sense of trading favorability to the upside. Now that initial little wave is done, it's just market makers are just going to keep keep chumming the waters, basically taking profits off of the dumb people that keep buying these dips. No offense if you have done that. It's simply just one of those things you got to recognize that it's not responsible, not a smart thing to do. I do dumb stuff all the time too. So not calling you an idiot, but don't be an emotional idiot. Somebody that gets like super hell-bent on, oh, this is my favorite coin, I'm going to take a long on it. So I'm just going to be a stubborn fool. That doesn't really help you in the long run, okay? Either way you look at it, we're under the 20-day SMA. There's majority of confirming factors outside of a small amount of support in this range, letting us know that further downside makes more sense, okay? So that's kind of where we're at there. Quick little heads up. Previous day closures, we had a lot of support at the 21.5 cent range. So if we continue lower, 21.5 cents is a sensible, no pun intended there, consideration for a long between now and then if you're going to blindly take a long. Don't recommend it though, but previous highs commonly work as new lows. We've got to see if that happens. All right, so those are my 2 cents. I hope that makes sense for you. Pun definitely intended on that one. I hope you learned something today, of course. Comment below, love to hear it. And thanks again for being an amazing part of my life. Welcome again to those who are new to the channel. We'll look forward to seeing you next one. Be safe out there. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.